Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Koroi Hawkins. Coming up, concerns in Guam as the US military ramps up its on-island presence.
It is the opposite of democratic participation. It is frustrating. It is frightening.
Also,
it's the fear of trying new foods.
We learn about neophobia and why it could be a factor in high obesity levels among Pasifika. And later on, we talanoa to social media influencer Daniel Rankin, who started out wanting to challenge the stigma around men and cooking. A former US congressman for Guam says military expansion on the island is happening at rates that haven't been seen since World War II. The governor of Guam says it's a sign of the times to come as more details unfold about the United States' plan to defend its military bases in the Pacific. Now, Guamanians are sounding the alarm about the military ramp-up and what it could mean for them and the region at large. Elisha Foon filed this report from Guam.
As Pacific leaders plan a peace zone, Guam is maintaining peace through nuclear weapons.
I consider that ways and measures to maintain peace in our island. And I know exactly the challenges of militarization. I know that. If they just get up and leave right now, we will be worse off in terms of peace, because I certainly don't want our people to be under Chinese rule.
Guam's Governor Lou Leon Guerrero says it's about striking a balance between working alongside the US military and indigenous Chamorro. But
North Korea every other week sends missiles out this way. So the bottom line for me as governor is, how do you weigh and balance peace, protection of freedom, democracy, and all of that with the threats of the geopolitics out here?
$8.7 billion is being spent by the US on upcoming missile testing in what's been described by Washington as an arms race against China. But some Guamanians and Chamorros say living alongside the military has come at a cost.
It is terrible that in today's world, under the flag of a country which is supposed to stand for very high ideals of democracy, we are the tip of America's spear. And all of these decisions can be made fundamental decisions about the safety of our families, the safety of our children, the safety of our island, whether we are a target. All of these things can be made without our consent, without our participation. It is the opposite of democratic participation. It is frustrating. It is frightening.
Chamorro historian Dr. Michael Bevacqua says Guam has experienced many conflicts. As a result,
to live in Guam is to live in a space in which a military fence is as common as a coconut tree. A threat of war is as common as an invitation to a party.
The military owns 30% of the land in Guam. It's used for 3 bases by the Navy, military and Air Force. Former US Congressman and now Pacific Island Security Center Chair Robert Underwood has called the advancement of military activity on Guam alarming.
In terms of Guam, it's historic and comparable to what happened in the immediate World War II period. Unprecedented, and created great and dynamic change in Guam. Since that time, compared to that, is what is occurring today, particularly in connection with this proposed missile defense system.
In December, long-range missiles will be tested from Guam twice a year for a decade. On top of that, 5,000 troops are being sent to Guam from Okinawa, Japan by the end of the year. It's part of the Pentagon's plan, led by the Missile Defense Agency, to build a shield to protect Guam, known as a 360-degree defense system. Missile Defense Agency Public Affairs Officer Mark Wright says it's comparable to the Israel Dome.
We're talking about launching missiles in order to stop, bad missiles that are filled with explosives or other, possibly other things, from hitting the island. This would be it's a contingency, of course, but it's a very most remote part of the U.S. territory, and it needs to be protected. And that's what we're talking about doing. So when you say, aren't you concerned about protecting the island? That's why we're doing this whole thing.
The U.S. territory has its own government, but its people cannot vote for the U.S. president and its only senator in Congress is a non-voting member. While Governor Guerrero says the US military is protecting them from China, her chief advisor on military and regional affairs, Carlota Guerrero, is reconciling with the ramp-up.
I hate the idea, personally, I hate the idea that we're going to have a 360 missile defense system going up, and what that's going to mean and what that's going to look like and what that's going to do.
The Missile Defense Agency's Mark Wright says they're working closely with allies.
Japan, we've worked recently with Australia on missile defense architecture, missile defense systems, trying to, figure out more effective ways that we can use missile defense to defend our various homelands and islands in that area.
Mr. Underwood says Guam is the largest known storehouse for nuclear weapons in the world.
They have divert airfields in the northern Marianas. They have a divert airfield in Palau. They're setting up a radar system there. There's conversation about expanding the runway in Yap. These are areas like if they anticipate that there's going to be a conflict, so they have a place to put their assets so that all their assets won't be here in Guam.
Mr. Underwood questions whether the governor can say no to the military. Leland Beatis, who also works alongside Mr. Underwood, says the military's use of words is telling.
They always say, but if deterrence fails, we must be ready to fight.
Chamorro activist Monica Flores is making sure the voices of fishermen, nuclear radiation survivors and landowners are not forgotten.
This military expansion represents the continued occupation, the continued colonization of our island, an increase in contamination, and we have to measure that against a very long history now of many generations dealing with negative health impacts because of military contamination here, a lot of which was classified and kept from us. So our people didn't even know that they were being exposed to Agent Orange, nuclear radiation. We really do have to assess this incoming project as something that's going to cause a lot of harm, and how can we anticipate more harm if we haven't reconciled with the harms that we're still facing. The threat of nuclear war is very real. The leaders need to rise for diplomacy instead of building up force projection in the Pacific that only provokes conflict, provokes tensions, and stokes war.
During RNZ Pacific's visit to Guam, the Navy, military, and Joint Region Marianas commanders all declined in-person interviews about the military expansion, saying the commanders were all off-island. The Air Force, however, did provide an interview about life on base, but refused to comment on any military expansion and missile testing on Guam.
An Otago University researcher hopes to gain insights into obesity levels among Pacifica by studying neophobia, or resistance to new foods. Dr. Edmund Feoko of the Department of Human Nutrition received a $30,000 New Zealand dollar grant from the Health Research Council. He says Pacific peoples need to shift behaviours, experiences and ideas around food, especially the need to consume so-called new foods. He spoke with Don Wiseman, who asked him to first define neophobia.
In a nutshell, food neophobia is the fear of trying new foods into your daily diets or in your meals. And so in the literature, a lot of the foods that have been highlighted that's seen as new foods is fruit, veggies, seeds, nuts, and whole grain products. And a lot of the research so far regarding food neophobia has focused solely on children or infants and introducing more healthier foods to our young people. But I guess with this study, I'm looking at our Pacific families, and so I'll be looking at Pacific adults as well to see what's holding us back from exploring and consuming new foods into our daily diets.
Yes, and when we talk about new foods in this context, it's healthy foods.
Absolutely, yeah.
I guess for everyone, myself included, we like what we know.
That's right, and it's similar with Pacific as well, And we like what we know, and we like what we have grown up with. And unfortunately, what a lot of our young Pacific people have grown up with is not the healthy foods that we now see that's been emphasized in the media and also in research as well. So I guess my hope in this study is to explore what's holding us back, or what are the barriers and also see what the potential opportunities there are for our Pacific people to start exploring and consuming these new foods into our daily diets.
Why do you think obesity is so prevalent among Pacifica, both in New Zealand and in the islands?
That is the million-dollar question, and I think there are a lot of factors and a lot of issues. We can look at monetary, we can look at the social, cultural, but we can also look at the systemic issues that take place in terms of the importation of processed foods into the Pacific. And these are the foods that we, not just Pacific, but everyone really love to eat because it has additional flavors that we don't usually cook with. And so there are a lot of factors behind to why obesity is a major issue. I guess from a Pacific lens, and I'll talk about one is the importation of processed foods. You go to the Pacific at the moment, and 9 times out of 10, everything is in our backyard, in terms of the plantation, the crops, and also in the sea as well. And yet, a lot of our people who would often resort to, instead of drinking coconuts or coconut drink from a coconut, they'll just buy from a bottle, or instead of just drinking mango drinks, they'll buy it from a bottle. You look at tuna, for example, you can actually go and fish for some tuna and other seafoods. And yet the go-to is to buy it from a can. And so these are the ongoing issues that are taking place, not just in the Pacific, but also here in Aotearoa for ethnic and Indigenous communities here in New Zealand.
So a lot of it, in a way, is not so much new foods, but going back to the old foods.
Yeah, that's it, absolutely. It's, fruit, veggies, seeds, nuts, whole grain products. They actually exist in our Pacific traditional diets. And so my hope is to get our people to start thinking about going back to these traditional diets and not being reluctant to consuming these new foods. Unfortunately, here in New Zealand, as already been highlighted across many years now, in terms of these healthy foods and the cost that it's a barrier for a lot of our working class families, hence why we do resort to the cheaper and unhealthier food. And yet the healthy foods that are expensive exist in our traditional Pacific diets from a long time ago. So my hope is to revitalize these traditional diets and getting our people, and particularly our young people, to start consuming these new but traditional foods that exist in our Pacific diets.
Now, you've got this research grant from the Health Research Council through Otago University. It's not a very big grant, is it? How long is it going to be, and how will you actually undertake the work?
Yeah, so it is not a big grant, but it's often seen as a seed grant, which means it gives me the opportunity to conduct a study and also kind of see what findings I can get from it, and then scale it up to a big nationwide study. So for this study here, I'll be exploring Pacific people with food neophobia, particularly in the Otago region, where there is a growing Pacific population around Oamaru, Dunedin, and Chicago, and everything in between, I guess. And then from there, hopefully we can scale it up into a bigger and explore bigger funding opportunities in the future in the next 18 months, and then we'll go nationwide.
In a first-of-its-kind visit, New Zealand's Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters visited the Federated States of Micronesia, also called FSM. The nation is made up of 4 island states separated by vast ocean. New Zealand announced it would give about 4.5 million New Zealand dollars to go towards projects aimed at improving early childhood development outcomes in the North Pacific. Caleb Fotheringham was in the FSM and filed this report.
The first bilateral meeting ever by a New Zealand minister with the president from the Federated States of Micronesia in the FSM took place yesterday. New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters says he hopes it's the beginning of a closer relationship.
Maybe because of distance we've not had the same focus as Polynesia or Melanesia. Well, I think that's irrefutable. But we're making up for it now.
Mr. Peters says he spoke to FSM President Wesley Samina about it being important to reach decisions together at the Pacific Islands Forum, the Pacific's top political decision-making body of the region.
Not just all go off on a different way and then find we can't move from that position we've already taken when a better view emerges from the Pacific Islands Forum. So we had that discussion and they agree.
New New Zealand will give $4.4 million for UNICEF-led projects for improving early childhood development outcomes across the North Pacific. The contribution and UNICEF's work was celebrated at Net Elementary School. UNICEF North Pacific Field Officer Cromwell Bakasia says the biggest challenge the organisation has is the high costs associated with travelling large distances.
It's so huge. If you come to think of it, Micronesia, it can be misleading because micro is small. But when you come to think of it, the area we cover from North Pacific, which includes Palau, the Marshall Islands and the FSM, is even bigger than the continental US.
The Federated States of Micronesia, along with the Marshall Islands and Palau, have what's known as Compact of Free Association agreements with the United States. Financial support is given to the three nations, and in return the US is given military access and control. Mr. Bakasia says there is a misguided belief that the extra help isn't needed because of these agreements.
There is a misconception that you have the support of the US, you're taken care of. But if you look at it, the situation analysis of children, there are alarming health indicators.
Secretary of Education Gardenia Isaac says the nation always needs additional support.
That's why we appreciate the support from Australian government, New Zealand government, Japan government, even China. China government, they also provide scholarships for students to go to school in China.
She feels Micronesia often gets forgotten when it comes to the wider Pacific.
You always hear about things happening down south. You go to Fiji, there's happening all of kinds of, things happening down south, but not much over here. But I think with the UN agencies coming in to this, I think more and more things are happening in North Pacific.
Winston Peters continues to Palau on Wednesday, where he will meet President Surunga Whipps Jr. It's his last stop on his 4-leg Pacific tour.
An Auckland-based Samoan social media influencer is on a mission with his pug dog Fraser, helping men learn how to cook. Daniel Rankin is a baker and has taken TikTok by storm, building a massive following in his efforts to make men feel comfortable in the kitchen. Rankins has accumulated over 3.7 million likes on his @ManCanCookNZ TikTok account and has had similar success on his Instagram profile. He spoke with Grace Fiavai in his kitchen.
I was a big kid, very overweight. I like to eat. My parents weren't around much, so I kind of had to learn how to cook to kind of feed myself. I started in 2014. I filmed my first YouTube video then, and then was very inconsistent with it. I didn't know how to use a camera or anything. This was before Fraser's time. Lockdown came around, and I'm like, oh hey, I know how to use a camera. I know how to cook. Let's create some content for my members so they can stay engaged during lockdowns and learn how to cook nice healthy meals.
How do you feel when you're in your element of cooking and baking?
I mean, for me, cooking is a way to kind of just calm the mind. It allows me to kind of block out everything else and just focus on the present and the cooking, and that's what kind of just blocks out all the anxiety and all the stress, and can be really present with myself. And when I started, you get a lot of negativity in the comments, a lot of personal DMs that are really mean.
What are some of the worst messages or comments that you've received?
I guess the worst message I've got was, "What are you going to do when your dog dies?" It's like I found that pretty harsh. Attack me if you want, but just leave Fraser out of it. I just responded with a love heart. And this is what I usually do in the comments, of just being kind to the negativity. Kind of helps me take it.
Do you think there's a stigma when it comes to Samoan men or men in general not knowing how to cook?
I don't know. I feel like, in Samoan culture, the men are always out there doing the umu and doing some sort of cooking. I think there's a lot of vulnerability in cooking. I think you kind of express a lot of yourself through it, and I feel like sometimes as Samoan men, we hold in a lot of vulnerability just because we're kind of in that environment growing up where we're kind of not taught but expressed to hold a lot more in. And
what was your first video that went viral, and what is the reach globally?
I think the first video to go viral was a Tres Leches cake, and we did it to Gypsy Kings, Bomboleo. America is our biggest following, and then we've got the UK as well, so it's like New York, The biggest cities would be like New York, London, and then Auckland and Sydney.
What is the meaning behind your byline or your name, Man Can Cook New Zealand?
I think back then, I don't know if it's still prevalent now, but back then I thought there was a stigma that, men couldn't cook. Not just in Samoan culture, but in general. So I named it Man Can Cook because I really believe men can cook.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, Tofua Soifua.